You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about Sharksploitation. Here we go. You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. One of your hosts, Bertie Gonzalez, with me today in the choppy waters of the Pacific or the Atlantic, wherever it is that we are. Pete Charbonneau. We're fighting off the sharks. We're talking Sharksploitation.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back into the studio to record a podcast episode, we're back doing it again. We have no fear. We have no fear of the water. We do not suffer from thalassophobia. We are braving the elements, the animals, to bring top-tier entertainment on the Fan2Fan Podcast.
If you couldn't tell, we're talking about the water. We're talking about sharks. We're talking about Sharksploitation.
There is a genre alive today that has survived 90 years of evolution, causing people to live in fear. Hollywood has created a monster and given it the name Sharksploitation.
It's because of Jaws.
Shark craze, which has gripped America.
Suddenly society developed this massive fear of sharks.
Sharkmania.
Movie that made $100 million and everybody wanted some of that.
Our focus was creating a shark. We weren't thinking about what it was going to do to the future.
Great white, man-eater, deep blue sea, sharktopus, sharknado,
The shallows.
the meg. Sharks were everywhere.
You watch shark movies, you watch shark documentaries. This creature is a Hollywood celebrity.
The shark is a natural monster in the ocean.
Why we are scared when we're standing in 3 feet of water at the shore. Sharks.
It ignites something in us that makes us feel alive.
Sharksploitation. Stream now on Shudder.
It is a documentary that I stumbled onto, Pete, that I had to pass your way. Interesting enough to merit a conversation. If you're not familiar with this, 2023 documentary. It's a film written and directed by Steven Scarlatta. I found out about this, Pete, because I was listening to the Best Movies Never Made podcast that's actually hosted by Steven Scarlatta and his podcasting partner, Josh Miller. I saw just from IMDb, Josh Miller has written some of the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, but I appreciate the cut of their podcast jib talking about these movies that have not been made. And ironically enough, it's always in our wheelhouse, movies from an era that we're nostalgic for movies that were never made. And I love, just like you do, hearing those behind the scenes, what could have been type stories. They do a good job on their show.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was just listening to, and I'm blanking on the name of the podcast because I quickly downloaded it because Steven Scarlatta was a guest on it. And I guess he had gone back years with the podcast host to, I think they had an open chat on a podcast, and he was one of the people that would come in under a pseudonym or whatever, and they struck up a friendship. So the episode was a couple of years old when Sharksploitation came out. So they were talking about the making of the film, and he mentioned that podcast that you just did, that he worked on, and Josh Miller, and they were talking about his career as a screenwriter, and I made the mental note to be I think that might be something that I might like to subscribe to. So I will get to that at some point and give it a listen. But I'm glad that you popped on it and enjoyed it.
Best Movies Never Made. I would definitely, this is where I think if you look for podcasts the way I do, Pete, I'll go into the feed, find that one movie, typically here you go, folks, a John Carpenter movie. Boom, John Carpenter reference early in the episode. You give me a 2-hour deep dive discussion about the never made Creature from the Black Lagoon remake directed by John Carpenter. That's the episode I'm downloading. That's probably the first episode that I will judge you by. I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean, as a listener, hey, if you guys are entertaining, you have a good chemistry, and you can throw out some good tidbits and entertain me, you've got me as a new listener. They've done a lot of good would have been movies that have kept me listening to them. They kind of kept talking about how they had been taking a break. They're creatives. They're making things. And this was one of very obvious comments that kept coming up, that they're working on some sort of, that Steven Scarlatta specifically was working on some shark thing. And then when I stumbled on that episode where they finally mentioned it enough, I thought, well, let me just Google this and check it out, to find out that it had been released a few years ago, that it had been released on Shudder. I think we've both been very happy with some of the stuff that Shudder has released, especially I think in that specific niche of horror-related documentary, horror noir, and they've done some Wiccan-type documentaries as well, found footage stuff. Anytime I've seen some of those, I've been impressed because I feel like the thoughtfulness, deep dive of it all has brought some like good introspection to something that, a genre that a lot of people dismiss, but feels like it's getting its spotlight now, and people are being critical in it in ways like this documentary.
Yeah, once I saw Shudder come up on the screen when I started watching the documentary, I'm like, this should be good. I unfortunately am not a current subscriber to Shudder, but I have been in the past. And, the Into Darkness series that tackled especially like the 80s horror boom, loved all that. And I feel like Sharksploitation is very similar in that vein where you're covering a lot of ground because there are a lot. I mean, this is almost like Amityville-esque with like the number of Sharksploitation shark movies out there, especially since the Big Bang, Oxygen Tank or otherwise of Jaws kind of really set this in motion. There was stuff before that, and we'll talk a little bit about that too, but pretty much all of this, this entire genre and subgenres are thanks to Jaws. And, having to cover so many films that are Sharksploitation or about sharks, the Sharktopus, six-headed shark attack, like stuff that goes from pretty straight-laced, like try to build tension, very realistic, to like completely off the wall, zany. That's a lot to cover. And I thought the documentary did a pretty good job for, like, I guess it was clocked in maybe like an hour and 45 minutes, almost 2 hours. And what I really liked about it, and curious to know if you thought so as well, it leads off with Roger Corman, which anytime you're leading off with Roger Corman on camera, you're getting a plus in my book. But on top of that, and on top of some of the other bigger names that they got, there were marine biologists and a lot of PhDs on the screen in those lower thirds that I was like, oh, okay, they could have taken the easy route and just had Joe Dante, Joe Alves, Carl Gottlieb, all the people involved, the Sharknado creative folks on there to just talk about their films. But I felt like they did a really important thing in grounding a lot of that with also the science behind sharks, because they do address the whole fallout after Jaws comes out of just what that did to the cultural psyche when it came to sharks and the very many negative effects that stemmed from that. And I thought that was worthy, and I thought that was interesting that they included all that in the documentary.
After the watching Sharksploitation, and as we were getting ready to talk about it, I went to YouTube and tried to find more interviews that Steven Scarlatta did in promoting his documentary, which seemed to be many years in the making, because he mentioned in one of them how he was working on it, I believe it was since like 2017. And he made the comment in one of them that he couldn't spend this much time, energy, emotional energy to making something without a soul. And I think, to your point, that actually does come out in something that easily could have been soulless. It really could have been, this is basically a fan fest where we're just going to get all these people, like you said, Joe Dante, Carl Gottlieb, talk about Jaws, talk about Sharknado, hour 32, you're done. And let's just move on. I started going into the IMDb too, because then I saw, well, who are the other producers? Because he produced this as well. He had worked on Jodorowsky's Dune that came out in 2013. And I remember seeing that a long time ago, kind of enjoying the Lynch Dune when it came out. Like, it was a very unique product of its time. Like, you really can't compare it to Star Wars, but it also came out at the success of Star Wars. So they're kind of in the same breath, but very unique. I think that documentary about another movie that was not made, which now makes sense why he does this podcast, with Josh Miller, that felt like it had a lot of heart. And I think because there was still a lot of archival material for that movie that was never made, and you could get a sense for the scope and how epic it could have been, the concept art, all the people that had worked on the not have made production. It felt like you were getting a good behind the scenes, not only of what that movie could have been, but also the people, what they put into it. So I was like, okay, it feels like this is in good hands. Like you said, Shudder feels like discerning taste in what they produce and put their name on. And then I saw the name Carrie Deignan Roy, and she's a producer on this too. And I saw it. I couldn't tell you honestly that I remember it. She made a George Romero documentary called Dock of the Dead. Came out 2014. It does feel like one of those thumbnails that's pretty ubiquitous on like Tubi and Pluto that you've probably seen, you've just never clicked on. The one that she did produce that I did watch recently that I would wholeheartedly recommend because it was earth-shattering for me was a 78/52, a great documentary about strictly the iconic shower scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Really, really digs into the scene, how it really changed horror movies in some ways. You never really think about how it changed cinema. And the reference for the movie is that there were 78 camera setups and 52 cuts. So that's where you get the 78/52. They really dig into it. And, you know, being a fan of Hitchcock, being a fan of what he means to like cinema and movies, it was impressive to see the purpose and the thoughtfulness that he had in making that, but also other people and their critical analysis of it. And you realize it's just a scene in the movie. It doesn't mean much until you start seeing that it means a lot and what it did, the seismic change it had in what could be portrayed and then what would later be portrayed in movies. This is a really big deal. We don't get some of the horror movies we have now unless something like that shower scene happened and moved the genre, moved film forward. That documentary does a great job in providing that context. Sharksploitation kind of does that in the same way because, again, as we kind of get into like Jaws and all the other stuff, that's where I think the soul comes into this. You get the context, you get a big picture before, after, and like you were saying, the unintended consequences of the success of Jaws into like shark conservation and the biologists and the marine folks that come in to give their opinions along with Joe Dante.
You're talking about like that dissolution. Like I was noticing that watching the documentary too, was how far, and this is not a catch-all because there are still some serious shark movies being made now. I think Dangerous Animals that had turned out still a B movie, but like taking sharks seriously. Talk about Jaws and what that represented, and then to go to 2024, 25, where you've got movies like Shark Exorcist 2, Unholy Waters, and things like that. Like there's that distilled energy, terror, tension that Jaws provided on screen. And again, like we don't probably need to go too deep into the cultural impact because it's been talked about and studied about so much, but it's easy to dismiss and maybe forget, especially if you're of a later generation, just what that impact was, just in terms of going to the beach and then just setting foot in the water, just setting foot in your pool. Like just, there's like that weird fear that just, you know, that Spielberg tapped into, and Peter Benchley before that, you know, with writing the book, that just, you know, before that, and many would argue after that, has been like so difficult to capture on screen when it comes to sharks.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
An endlessly fascinating animal to this day, and thankfully one that I think, while still being used in movies as, if not an antagonist, like a monster or something that's you know, to be overcome in some form, but I think they've regained that respect back as being just like a really interesting part of our planet that is not, you know, does not have a mind of a serial killer that's like out there hunting people, although maybe portrayed that in some of these movies.
And it's funny, we're having this conversation in the 50th year celebration of Jaws. I think I've seen so many good documentaries about Jaws throughout the years, and recently saw Jaws at 50. This is where I think Jaws made such a big bang when it came out, that when people are like, oh, like it's kind of hyperbolic to talk about how big of a deal it was. when you look at it with hindsight, you can see clearly that it was a massive deal. It was harder to see that when it actually happened in real time. I think that's also the power of Jaws and of Spielberg's filmmaking, is that even at that time, you could feel the impact the movie had and how it really turned into shark hunting season, a unintended consequence of the success of the film.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the principal people involved in making Jaws had since gone on to work very hard to kind of reverse that stereotype that unfortunately cropped up. And you go back to 75, it was just such a different time. I could just speak personally for myself. I was of the age where I shared the story before. I was way too young. My parents took me to see it in the drive-in. I was terrified, but at the same time, it instilled that fascination with sharks. I remember being upstate in New York, visiting my family, and being in like a general store and finding a magazine that was all about shark attacks. Total pulpy thing that was just all sensationalism. And I'm like, of course, like fascinated by it. I'd go to the library. I'd get any book on sharks that I could to read about it, to read about, what happens. I was just like completely taken by it. I lived on Long Island, so we had the beaches right nearby, and we'd be at the beach all the time. I would not go in. Like if I ever got to the point where the ocean went over my head, I'd have like a mini panic attack, although I loved being in the water. But like once it was over my head, that fear kicked in, kind of like those shots in Jaws of, shark point of view looking up at the unsuspecting woman swimming or the Kintner boy on the raft. That was the stuff that just is like that primal fear of, yes, there's something below, but you don't know it and you're completely oblivious to it, to the point where at the time, I remember reading somewhere like, sharks were attracted to bright things or like red. Like I wouldn't wear a red bathing suit because I'm like, shark might mistake that for blood in the water. And if I saw someone wearing red, you'd kind of see me like slowly moving away from. And, and I was always paranoid because I'm Irish and French Canadian. So, by genetics, I'm pretty translucent. So like just the fact that my pale legs in the water are probably a beacon for sharks to come nibbling. So I was always paranoid about that too. So, Jaws instilled that healthy fear in me like it did a lot of people of my generation and generations beyond. So it's curious to me just to kind of see how this whole genre and the subgenres go. Like, I don't know, should we do some table stakes here? I'm curious to know what your feeling is on some of these, like when it comes to like Sharknado and some of like the really out there stuff. Like, where do you fall in the Sharksploitation genre? Like, what do you like? What do you not like?
It's funny because there's one point where in one of his interviews where he's promoting the documentary, he talks about how he had more people tell him, well, as long as you don't cover any of that Asylum Sharknado stuff, then you'll be good. And I listened to 3 or 4 of them. That was the consistent feedback he was getting from people who maybe looked at Sharksploitation movies with a sense of purity about them, that you had Jaws, but you could only go so far, that you could do the orcas, that you could do the piranhas if they were kind of in the aquatic world. You could even, like alligators, maybe a bridge too far, but, you can do like Mako and a few others, but you got all the Italian movies. But Sharknado and anything after that, 6-headed Sharktopus, was a bridge too far.
It's about to tear through the city alive!
Sharks. Tornado. Sharknado. Enough said.
Bring in the bigger chopper.
We're gonna stand and fight. Tara Reid in the SYFY original movie, Sharknado.
I like context. And I think about all of those Westerns that our grandparents watched and then that our parents watched. Bonanza, Gunsmoke, The High Chaparral. It took Clint Eastwood going to Italy to make a spaghetti Western to now partner with Sergio Leone and all the other Sergios. There were at least 2. And they're making, these other movies. And you get like The Great Silence, and you get all of these off-kilter Django movies. And they feel so different from Gunsmoke and Bonanza and Maverick. And they feel grittier and harsher just till you get to the other version of that, which is almost like hijinks using Westerns. It's no different than Airplane. It's in the same version. You get Towering Inferno. You get The Poseidon Adventure. You get Airport. all of these big catastrophe movies. And then eventually there's a cycle where people are like, great, we saw every major structure in the world blow up or get crashed into. Now we got to make fun of it. You made a lot of serious Western movies. Now we got to make fun of it. Well, how do you do that? You find ways to do it. Mel Brooks certainly found a way to do it. The Italians did the same thing. Well, we'll have a guy who can draw really quickly, and, you know, it's a bit buffoonish. This is a far cry from Clint Eastwood, but it's similar. That's how I view a lot of the Sharknado movies. Jaws, there were movies before that. It's just none of them made the impact that Jaws did. And then Jaws comes out and I think sets up the language for sharks. A young Pete Charbonneau who was a floating disco ball of flesh in the water. It was, you know, hearkening out to any sharks that were...
I can refer to myself from now on. Thank you for that.
Enjoy that. Update the business card, Pete. How did you know to be afraid of a shark until Spielberg in the movie gave you the visual language to visualize what a shark underwater would look like coming at you? I think even similar to Hitchcock in the Psycho scene, there's that silhouette behind the curtain and the knife slowly comes up. It doesn't mean anything until you see it. And then you start thinking, this silhouette is scary. Now all of a sudden, why am I afraid of being in the shower? Why am I afraid of closing the curtain? Why am I afraid of being alone in here and not just at least knowing that, you know, my wife is outside in the bedroom, being like, hey, you there, sweetie? It's like, yeah. Okay. Don't know why. I just needed that little moment. I think that's where Jaws, that's why it did so much work. And then eventually it did what all of those other genres did. It went to the place of ridiculousness where it kind of took itself back. And then we were no longer afraid of towering infernos or lone gunmen, Western gunfighters, or sharks, because they now had 6 heads. They just took the natural progression that a lot of these movies do, which is go from dead serious milestone to, well, here's a Sci-Fi Channel movie that was made on a budget, maybe produced by Roger Corman, who's to say. He did a few of those. It's still in the ripples of Jaws.
I saw the first Sharknado. I don't think I've seen any of the sequels. My reasoning behind that was, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, but I felt like Sharknado was in on the joke. I love my so bad it's good, but I like them to be unintentionally hysterical, not trying to be so outrageous. That being said, what I really appreciated that this documentary did in talking to a lot of the creators of the Sharknado series, it was good for me to see the faces behind the creating of it and them talking about, one, how they were completely blown away and surprised that it became as successful as it did. And I distinctly remember that the whole hashtag thing, you know, blowing up on Twitter when the first one aired.
I was going to say, I think that's the other part too that's interesting to this, is that imagine Jaws coming out now, and obviously it would have to be a product of its time, but Sharknado came out at a time where you had social media and you had things trending, you had memes. And I think that's the thing, is that this movie was almost made at a point in time, Sharknado that is, in 2013, where it is meme worthy. It is so bad it's good, but it's also creating one of the things that we don't have a lot now, which is these sort of like communal pop culture moments where we're all kind of watching the same thing. And I think that movie, for whatever it was worth, I remember like, well, it's Saturday night. That's when usually sci-fi premieres. They're like made for Sci-Fi Channel movie, The Man with 2 Brains with Bruce Campbell. All right, well, that's what I'm doing that Saturday night. Is this movie going to be great? No. Is it got Bruce Campbell in it? Yes. So I'm watching it. I'm just going to see if Ted Raimi makes a cameo because he might. Let's see what happens. That's what Sharknado felt like. And obviously that felt this, and other people felt the same. A lot of college students, other people like you and me that were just young professionals. And we're like, I still like Sci-Fi Channel. All right, I'll check this out. And then people go online. They say how it's ridiculous, but it's meme worthy. It's hashtag worthy. I think that's also a part of this formula, why Sharknado blew up.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, there's something about the ridiculousness of some of these things where just from watching the clips from the documentary, and I compiled my own list because I am a fan of shark movies, because I still, while I'm not as well versed as I was when I was a kid, like it doesn't take much to sell me on a certain type of shark movie. I will go see it. And so like the Sharknado stuff, again, like I appreciated the energy and the fact that they're like, we can't believe they're letting us make something like this, and we're just going to go crazy. And unless someone tells us to pull back, we're just going to see how ridiculous we can make this. So while it did not change my mind, like it's not my cup of tea. It won't be my cup of tea. But the great thing is that it doesn't have to be, because these subgenres exist for the people that love that stuff, that love sand sharks or Santa Jaws or all this other ridiculous stuff. When the documentary was showing like clips from all of these movies, there was one that I'm pretty sure was just someone's like rough sketch of a shark like floating in the air at one point, and that's literally like it just composited on the screen. So it's like you're running the gamut of special effects with these things too, but people love that stuff. That's awesome. That's great. That's not for me, but I got a little bit more of an appreciation from the people that made it, and I credit again the documentary for something that can't be an exhaustive compilation of Sharksploitation films and the like, covering enough of the bases as those Shudder docs usually do. I see what they're doing here, and maybe it piqued my curiosity on some other movie that I need to look into, see, or maybe just want to find out a little bit more about.
Like 2013's Ghost Shark.
It's Dad's boat. What the hell is he? Cut it out, dumbass. Seriously? What the hell?
A couple of yahoos got a great white ball. Help me!
You can't explain how a shark killed 3 people on the deck of a boat.
Ghosts are real. I don't have time to listen to this nonsense anymore, Ava.
I'm gonna bite you in the ass if you don't wake up.
Maybe all we gotta do is stay dry, and it'll leave us alone.
Stories you and the others are saying makes no sense.
You think ghosts are logical? We got Mick, man. We got him in total pieces.
Is the will to live, and that thing is coming after us.
Get out of the water!
Your daddy brought this horror into our world. You get to send it back.
That one piqued my interest. Some of them almost have to be so absurd that when you see some of the spawn of Sharknado, I guess that's what I'll call them, like the Sharktopus mega shark versus giant octopus 3-headed shark attack, those all come out after, or maybe like right around the same time as Sharknado. Ghost Shark. Okay, so what is Ghost Shark? It seems like it's just a disembodied spectral shark that is attracted to bodies of water and doing what it would do as a predator, the right amount of ridiculous. Like you said, there's self-awareness, and then there's something like Night of the Creeps or Monster Squad that when I look to those movies, there is a self-awareness in those movies, but there is a an earnestness, like we've always talked about those movies, that makes them a little bit timeless. I was like, all right, you know what, Ghost Shark, you have my interest. I will find you in the Tubiverse and check you out. Yeah, that is something about all of these, because that's more of the latter version of this. There's all the ones that came out like right after Jaws, especially those Italian films. I mean, you're as well versed in mom and pop video store drudge as I am. You were familiar with a ton of those, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I didn't see it until later, but Cruel Jaws, I mean, that's so bad it's good.
Beyond every fear you've ever imagined, there is a terrifying reality. The Great White Shark.
Get on shore!
Port Harbor has been invaded by the ultimate predator.
It's coming right at him!
The most terrifying motion picture of 1982. Great White. Rated PG.
Great White with James Franciscus, which I think was the one that got sued by Universal because it's essentially the plot of Jaws and Jaws 2 rolled into one. So that got taken out of theaters. That's another one that it's completely ridiculous. And this is funny because I was thinking back on this ahead of us recording. My memory is tainted by time, but when I was really young, and this was 77 because I looked it up, So this is after Jaws. My aunt took me to see Peach Dragon in the theater, which I think people might remember was a hybrid animation live action Disney movie. Mickey Rooney, Helen Reddy. 1977, I'm 5 years old, going on 6. And I distinctly remember there was a shark movie playing in the theater, and my aunt and her friends left me in Peach Dragon by myself, which they were not supposed to do. But they're like, we're going to sneak into the shark movie. And my brain was like, I think it was called Tiger Sharks. Then I looked it up. And so that film Tintorera came out in 1977.
They are young. They are free. The night is theirs. The sea is filled with promise. But they are not alone. Below, a killer waits. There's a monstrous killer churning up the sea.
The accident happened here. Have they got the shark yet? It's still being hunted. It won't be long. They say that a shark returns always to the scene of an attack. When it comes back, I'll be waiting. I'm going down alone tonight. I'm going to kill it.
Now there is vengeance. There is man against the sea's deadly high executioner. A monstrous killer is churning up the sea. Tintorera, Tiger Shark, rated R.
And I saw the poster, and the poster, I think if I'd seen that at the time, would have scared the shit out of me, because it's like the shark coming out of the waves, like biting someone in half or something like that. And I distinctly remember my aunt coming back at one point, and I'm like asking all these questions, because I'm like in my head, I'm like, oh my God, like what's going on? And she said something like, oh, someone was surfing and the shark came in and bit them in half, or this. Again, this may or may not happen in the movie, but this is my memory. And so now my imagination is exploding. So I'm thinking back to the younger me sitting in Peach Dragon while my brain is like trying to comprehend what my aunt is watching in another theater with this tiger shark movie. I was cracking myself up thinking about it, because I was like more interested in finding out what was going on. Like I knew there was no chance in hell that they were going to let me sneak into the tiger shark movie. So I was stuck in Peach Dragon. But yeah, that was one of the first ones coming in the wake of Jaws, pun intended, that I remember being on my radar at a young age. And to this day, I don't even know if I've ever seen that movie, but that memory is ingrained for life, apparently, at this point.
That is the thing about a lot of those, especially I think those Italian Jaws knockoffs, as we've talked about with Peplum, Sword and Sandal movies, Westerns. The Italians had no druthers about making ripoffs or knockoffs. For every Star Wars, there's a Star Crash. For every Jaws, there's a Devilfish. That's a Lamberto Bava movie. There's a genetically engineered shark octopus hybrid. And if that's not the godfather of 2009's Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, I don't know what is.
My God, what the hell is that? Whatever it is, I wouldn't want to rub it the wrong way.
I'm not an expert, but these don't look like the teeth marks of a shark to me.
It's not a shark.
I think I can safely say that the creature found in your part of the ocean is a living fossil.
The cells of this creature have a life of only 8 months.
And I did see that one, because that's the one where the shark like leaps out of the ocean and like bites the plane in half.
Yeah, some of those felt like they had the ubiquitous airbrush VHS cover where it was very easy to mistake one for the other. Probably no different than how a lot of people feel about thumbnails from the Asylum type movies and the SYFY channel original movies that come out now. But that's where, again, I appreciated that the documentary wasn't discerning and trying to be a purist and say there's only Jaws and then there's only these movies. What is it, like 47 Meters Under or The Shallows, which tend to be more modern day serious quote unquote versions of the Jaws vengeful sea creature type movie, specifically sharks. It kept the group picture open for the Italian knockoffs, the Asylum films, and it didn't talk about it too much, but you kind of briefly, some of the movies that came before. Like I knew there was a Burt Reynolds shark movie called, ironically enough, Shark with an exclamation point.
Any sharks down there? Naturally.
Heart-pounding action that won't let up.
A love affair to rival all great screen romances. Witty dialogue that crackles with realism.
Hello.
Hello.
And Burt Reynolds in a role he really sinks his teeth into. Shark, March 26th at 1 on KTSF.
More action film than shark attacking film. And Blue Water, White Death, which I've only ever heard of because Spielberg has mentioned it, I feel, in every single Jaws documentary.
Hugely influential, not only on Jaws, but yeah, like a lot of what came after that. And that was one, I don't know that I've ever seen the whole thing, but I've definitely seen clips from it. I know clips had shown up in straight documentaries in the 70s and 80s. Like I've seen a ton of those clips before. Eugenie Clark, who Spielberg utilized for Jaws to get some of the actual great white shark footage and that. The names involved in that, I definitely knew them when I was like, voraciously reading about sharks all the time. So I don't recall seeing that whole thing, but I knew about that. That one was on my radar as well.
That one was 71. Jaws, obviously, 1975. Again, they don't mention a lot of these, like, I guess, precursors to Jaws, but I think they also spend enough time with Jaws to not have made it a Jaws documentary, which it could easily be, and also warrants discussion. But then kind of moving on past that and realize, yes, Jaws, important. Peter Benchley, his wife, Wendy, and their eventual work later in shark conservation, also important. I think that's why I really appreciated this documentary because, again, it could have just been, hey, we're going to just talk about schlock. And that would have been fun in its own way. There was a thoughtfulness in the way it approached everything and the time it gave to all the movies, but also in the ways that it just wasn't about the movies. It was about sharks and what they represent and what they've come to represent and attempts to conserve them. And that's where the soul comes in. So I appreciate Steven Scarlatta kind of taking the time to not just make it a trailer fest where it's just, hey, here's a bunch of movies. Let's just walk down nostalgia lane for a little bit. And I'll remember, oh yeah, Cruel Jaws. I got to put that on my to watch list. Yeah. There were some, it certainly did that for me, but I was like, oh no, this was really well done.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I liked how, I can't remember who in the documentary framed it, but the way they framed a lot of the movies that came before Jaws was these were movies with sharks in them. They weren't movies about sharks. Like
that's right.
Shark was not the central character, antagonist or focus of the film. Like you had like a couple of those James Bond films where they got the sharks in the tank. Sharks might make an appearance. And I was thinking about it too. Like it makes sense when you just think of the history of people's interactions with the water. A lot has been made of like the 13 New Jersey shore shark attacks. And having read a couple of books about those specific incidents, it sets up that historical context of people just were not into swimming in the ocean prior to the turn of the century. So it just, people's interactions with sharks, unless you were a fisherman, I didn't say were very rare. And so not a lot was known. You had like the mythology, which they talk about in the documentary with like Hawaii and how, sharks are deified there. And there was that fable of like the shark boy. They tackle all this stuff, but I always appreciate when you provide that historical context, because then when you traverse into the future, I guess the one good thing about having these ridiculous, not even just ridiculous titles, but these ridiculous films with the sharks now is like, you're not worried about people getting the wrong ideas about sharks. Yes, there are a couple of the serious toned ones like the 47 meters down and dangerous animals and things like that still depict the violence that sharks can potentially wreak. But again, like they're not actively seeking out humans to attack. We know this now. We didn't know this in the 70s. So I don't even know like if something that like that could be replicated now when it comes to sharks. Like if Jaws were to come out now, would people have the same reaction? We just have the knowledge base is just so different than it was back then. Like, and again, like it's hard for me to go back in my own brain, the stuff that I was reading in the early 80s, I'm sure would be laughed at by most marine biologists now as being like, this is so woefully out of date. Like, it's 40 some odd years, but it doesn't seem like that long ago. But like the leaps and bounds we've made just in terms of understanding sharks is like, it's crazy. And I think people have a great, healthy respect for them now. And so you can have these ridiculous movies, but still either be rooting for the shark or have some sympathy for the animals, as opposed to just looking at it as, oh my God, this evil creature. Let me get a couple of friends and some sticks of dynamite and let's just start like bombing the bay and see how many we can kill.
There's that one marine biologist who I think said the line, they're not infecting our waters, we're infecting their waters. Their swimming ground, this is their feeding ground. And it just happens to be a species that taste, sharks don't have hands, so they taste through their mouth. And that idea that this connection between shark attacks, it's like, well, they're trying to taste something. It's just unfortunate that the thing that it's using to taste also is full of very sharp teeth. So there is a massive consequence here versus, say, like a really curious giraffe puts its head down in a zoo and it's like, I wonder what you are. Oops, I ate your hat, or I grabbed your hat. I didn't know what it is. It looked like a leaf. I guess I'll move on.
Don't miss All in the Family, tomorrow at 5.
Tonight, an ABC Sunday night movie special.
Run in the water!
Tonight, the most exciting movie ever made comes to television. The movie that made motion picture history.
No, this is not a boat accident. It was a shark.
Tonight, get ready for Jaws.
Jaws lends itself to being a thriller, to being an action movie, a horror type movie, to being a compelling, amazingly compelling human drama about people that in some ways only gets made because Bruce didn't work. And now you have all this time with all these actors, so you just keep shooting character. And then you find yourself with a lot of footage of these great actors building their characters when you can't show the shark. And you get something timeless like Jaws, and you get a studio that bets on a young kid. And then all of a sudden, Fox is like, I don't know, there's this other young kid named Lucas, and he wants to make some other movie. If it wasn't for Jaws being as successful as it was, would we have had a studio system that would have continued to look at the Francis Ford Coppola's and the Lucases and all these young directors and essentially let them make movies that had good budgets and in some cases went well over their scheduled production like Jaws did? That's all to say, like, that's the seismic impact that Jaws had, that they do a nice job of portraying in the documentary while also giving everything else, all those ripples again, the time to shine.
Oh, and you mentioned characters with Jaws. I mean, but not just characters, but flawed characters. Like,
yes,
the three men on that boat all have their major flaws. Maybe more a product of 70s filmmaking. Like, I feel like today, movie like that, like the main character has like the one thing that they have to overcome, by the end of the movie, where in Jaws, they may all have like the one thing, but it's not so pronounced and it's a little more subtle. Like, I mean, you could point to, Chief Brody as like his fear of the water, but it's more than that. Like, he's trying to wrangle this town and not doing a great job of it because, like, what his impulse is to close the beaches, but he's giving in to the mayor and keeping it open later than he wants it to. So, like, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Quint, I'm sure papers and books could be written on Quint's character and Hooper as well. There was just something compelling about those specifically, but not just them. Like, everyone in that movie is doing something really interesting. But when you get down to it, when they're on the sea hunting the shark, it's just those three men and their dynamic and just, bringing all that to bear, that the shark almost becomes secondary, not just because of the filming and the difficulties with the animatronic shark, but it's interesting too how you're talking a film that's not just the greatest shark movie of all time. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. I think Quentin Tarantino calls it the greatest movie of all time, not the greatest film, but the greatest movie. And I think we all kind of know what he means with that differentiation. Anything coming after that in a genre that is niche, like how you live up. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why they get so ridiculous, because it's like, we're not even going to try. It's like Joe Dante talking about piranhas. Like, yes, this is a parody.
Piranha, voracious flesh-eating fish common to warm water climes, attacking in schools of hundreds. Their razor-sharp teeth can strip a man to the bone in less than a minute. Not found in American waters. Until now. Piranha, they're here, and they're hungry.
We know it's a parody. You know it's a parody. Just let us cook on that, and let's just have fun with it.
And Spielberg recognizing it and almost going to the studio and saying, "Let him do it. It's not Jaws. It's a parody, guys. This is not the same thing."
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting when Joe Dante mentioned that in the documentary. He's like, thank God he recognized.
Yes, that's what I think. Again, the documentary does a good job of from going from something as iconic as Jaws to movies that would later show a shark breaking the water to take down a helicopter and or plane, to going even further to the sci-fi asylum movies. These are all sharksploitation. They're all a part of this genre that has now become a genre, like the Amity films, the ninja exploitation movies of the 80s, barbarian exploitation movies, again, of the 80s. For every Conan the Barbarian that came out, Schwarzenegger, Milius, Oliver Stone, they make the gospel that everyone else just perverts, in crazy ways and in fun ways. Like for every Death Stalker, you get a Death Stalker 2. Way to go, Jim Warnowski.
Hey! What about we even up those odds considerably?
Does everyone feel properly sharksploitated out there? I hope so.